you. All right, so I'm just gonna keep myself on time here because I have only 15 minutes to go through this. Hello everyone, and a huge thank you to all those who hooed at the start. So I'm Divya, and I'm gonna be talking about the open source in Asia. But before that, I'd honestly love to thank the entire OpenUK team for A, having me on here, and B, for putting on such a fantastic conference lineup. So I think y'all deserve a huger round of applause than I did at this point. So please, can we have a round of applause for the organizing team, please? So before I begin, I just want to see if there are people of Asian descent or who are from Asia here. So can you please put up your hands? All right, that's a good amount, and it's normally more than what I see, so nice to see y'all. I'm not going to go through the introductory slide. Y'all can read through, but essentially I'm going to preface the entire presentation that y'all are going to be the recipients of for the next 15 minutes by saying that I wish I could cover all the aspects of the open tech ecosystem in Asia, but I literally just have 15 minutes, and I have been focused on the software ecosystem over the last 11 decades, 11 years. So I am going to be focusing on the open source software ecosystem in Asia, and there's no particular slide as to why I'm doing this, but I want to just take like a couple of minutes to explain why this is an important conversation to have in a conference, ironically in the UK, about the open source ecosystem in Asia. The reason is open source, even though it is a concept that has originated in the West, it's gaining traction in other regions, as was clearly evident in the previous talks and the other talks that have been presented at the conference. So there's definitely a global community at work here, but are we truly being inclusive? Are we truly being diverse when we talk about very specific ecosystems within the open source ecosystem and not talk about the others? So my talk isn't going to solve the problem, I know that, but it is to set the proverbial conversation ball rolling on, talking about all the other regions that are also potentially contributing to the open source ecosystem other than the Western ones that we already probably have a lot of data about. So speaking of software, I'm sure, and I'm pretty much willing to gamble a lot of money on the fact that you'll have heard about this quote by the inventor of C++, saying that our civilization is as reliant on software as it is on water. Now, given the context of this conference, I think we can safely amend it to our civilization runs on open source software. In fact, I have a +1 from Jono earlier in the morning who actually said this. So I think we're good here. But if you talk about the people in an open source ecosystem who actually are responsible for this software, not just from a builder or a creator perspective, but also the day-to-day maintenance and the day-to-day advocacy around it. There are a lot of people. And depending upon the research, the report, or the documentation that you consult, there are a lot of ways to categorize them. And since this is my presentation and it's it's a labor of love and the pet project that I've been working on for like around a couple of years, we're going to roll with my categorization, although all other categorizations are also pretty good. And the categorizations are by no means distinct in the sense that some of these fall, like if you talk about a contributor, adopter, and policymaker as the three categories, some of these do have overlaps. And we are going to talk about the open source ecosystem in Asia from each of these standpoints. And first up, we're going to talk about the contribution perspective, in which we notice that when we talk about open source contributions in general, there's a traditional dominance that comes from the Western side of the globe. And that is normal because, like I said before, the concept originated here. And irrespective of the report that you consult, this is going to be reflected in that report. And it's not to say that Asian countries do not really have a part to play in the open source ecosystem. It does. But the thing is, they are slowly making their mark. In fact, countries like India, China, Japan, Korea, they do have a presence on the State of Octoverse reports. And in fact, the report from 2022 and 2023 list India as the fastest growing developer economy on GitHub. In fact, to go forward, the developer numbers from India are set to equal the developer numbers from US by 2025, according to the same report, if the growth rate is maintained. Now, if I'm just saying this as a statement, doesn't that mean, open source ecosystem in Asia is thriving and booming and there's absolutely nothing to be done to better it? It's not the case because we're just looking at one platform and one report, or maybe a series of reports, but literally just from the same platform, that is GitHub. And even within the GitHub State of Octover's report, if you look at the definition of a developer, it's anyone with a GitHub account. Now, I don't know about you, but I contribute to the open source ecosystem, and there are way more roles than just a developer. So there are code and non-code contributions, and even within non-code, there are sections. So there's that granularity with respect to who's contributing what is not there even in that State of Octover's report, which is considered to be one of the most comprehensive reports across the tech industry. And if we are looking at other reports, say outside GitHub, we actually do look at other foundation reports that talk about their specific contribution activity. You'd notice that they target very specific geographies. For example, the Linux Foundation's Global Spotlight report actually states at the very outset that it began to include the Asian continent as a data point just in the 2023 report. Before that, there was no record of it. And even if you talk about the Asian continent, it takes data majorly from the Chinese, Japanese, and Indian countries. I mean, rather, I shouldn't have made it an adjective, but the three countries. And countries other than that are sort of not taken in as a major data point. So there's a lack of granular and non-fragmented data that's available to us when it comes to the contribution statistics. And if you piece together whatever little data that you have from this region, you'll see that non-code efforts are more prominent. It's not to say that code efforts are not there, but they're far and few coming from the Asian region. In fact, efforts that are non-code are even organized by students and early career folks. And this is based on various surveys that were taken in the Southeast and Chinese, Japanese, Korean regions. And this is primarily because of the fact that the outreach for open source in general is targeted at students and early career folks. It's easier for onboarding, I get it, but there's a definite fragmentation in the kind of expertise we bring to the table. So the effects obviously are global, because this is a global problem, because outreach is not tailored to a very specific region. But when you talk about the effects of this problem, that is the outreach being targeted to very specific audience, the impact is exacerbated in the Asian region, because in comparison to a Western employer, an Asian employer is less likely to support their employee for open source contributions. And I'm actually testimony of that, because I used to work in a non-open source company before transitioning to what I am right now as an advocate with an open source company. And this is the case even if they're adopters. And that provides a nice segue to my next segment on the adoption statistics. And if you talk about adoption in open source in the continent of, adoption of open source in the continent of Asia, you'll notice that it sort of is very similar to the contribution statistics, in that we're just like sort of making the mark, but not yet there when you're talking about widespread adoption as compared to other regions in the globe. And if you talk about the reason behind the adoption, it's to get access to the latest and greatest in technology and at a lower cost, because open source licensing, it's a controversial topic, but it's also comparatively cheaper when you talk about it in comparison to the proprietary software. So it comes at no surprise that open source software is finding adoption both from the both in case of the community based as well as enterprise software in the APAC region. And in fact APAC ties in second, or not ties in second, ties with Europe in terms of both these software adoptions. And if you talk about where it is being used, it's normally used in IT modernization efforts with a heavy focus on emerging tech like AI, ML, serverless compute in the next 2 years. And if we were to talk about some of the concerns around adoption when it comes to the Asian ecosystem, as I think Ahmed mentioned before, there's a definite concern around the lack of skills, proficiency, and expertise in the ecosystem. And that ties into the requirement for dedicated technical support, which also emerges as a concern. And security and compliance actually should figure way up given the recent spate of incidents in this space. But in the reports that actually were referred to during this presentation, none of them had security and compliance in the top 3 or top 5 even. And this is all of this would really not have been possible. Like the open source movement would not have gained as much traction as it did in Asia without the policy making efforts that go behind it. And if you look at the policy making efforts in Asia, I know that it's not very clear, but this is a summary. And huge shout out to I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce your name right, Maseh Shida. I actually watched your talk during the Open Source Summit, and I hugely borrowed a lot for this presentation as well. So this is one of the insights that I gained from her presentation. And honestly speaking, if you look at this slide, you'll notice that there was not a lot of activity in the Asian ecosystem with respect to policy making before 2000. And that's very representative of what the case was globally, because there was almost no activity in this space. And if you were to look at the activities subsequent to that, you would notice that Asia comes in second only to the European region with respect to the number of issued and accepted policies. And if we were to talk about decade-on-decade growth, this would amount to a 220% increase in the policies issued by the Asian countries. Also, a subsequent increase in the approved initiatives as well. And all of this actually is towards transitioning a majority of the software from the proprietary to the open source side for reducing costs. That also explains the increase in ministerial authorities actually working on such initiatives. And all of this data is maintained on GitHub, and you can refer to this at the very end with the help of a QR code. I'll be putting all of the resources up. But if we were to talk about how all of this ties in to development within the Asian ecosystem, right? Like how this ties into development of the countries in general and how it propels the open source ecosystem forward. There are two examples. The first one is the Indian example of the unified payment interface, which is not only leveraging open source as a technology, but it also is in collaboration with the banking interface, that is the immediate payment system. And technical details aside, there their main goal, the government of India's main goal was to improve the financial inclusion index. That is a measure of the sustainable development within a country. And why was it so important for us to improve financial index was to actually help us grow better in achieving all the sustainable development goals set out by the UN. So I wanted to cover more. I'm sorry that I ran out of time, but essentially, I think, in summary, Asian footprint in the ecosystem is definitely growing, but it's not without its lack of challenges. They include geographical and regional barriers, but there's also a definite requirement of tailoring the awareness and outreach initiatives within the ecosystem to the specific continents that they're targeting. And there's also obviously efforts from the policy making authorities in these following areas that help reduce the cost and improving the footprint. But there is obviously much to be desired in the way we include people from these continents into the ecosystem. So thank you so much for being a wonderful audience. And I'm sorry I ran out of time a little bit, but here's the QR code if you want to scan for the resources that I used within the presentation. And have a wonderful rest of the conference.